Welcome to part 2 of a message series we've called Naughty or Nice. And we're calling it Naughty or Nice because there exists for some people, sometimes a lot of people, this idea that faith in God, that the Christianity, the Christian faith, is something similar to what we find in the song, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, which sounds ridiculous. But when you think about the words, first of all, Santa's kind of creepy, right? He's watching you when you're sleeping. What's up with that? That's not okay. But he's making a list. He's checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty or nice, right? Don't cry, don't pout. I'm telling you why. Santa's on his way, which sounds like a threat. But for a lot of people, that's how they view God. That he's watching, that he's paying attention. He's making sure that you're either going to be on the nice list or the naughty list based on your behavior. Whether you've done the right things, you've done the wrong things, or you've neglected the right things. Maybe you're in because you're living life a certain way, but you're out because of something you've done. And this whole framework, this naughty or nice framework, we're trying to say is one, it's not the way things are. It's different than that, but it's actually better than that. But that exists in a lot of people's minds, that this is how faith in God operates. So much so that Jesus' half-brother, James, actually wrote about this in a letter that he put together to a group of Christians. He said this. He's like, when tempted, that is, when you feel like you want to go do something, maybe something you shouldn't do, right? No one should say that God is tempting me. That God's behind this. And the word tempt here doesn't just simply mean to oh, he's dangling something out in front of me that I want to grab. It's also like a test. Not like a test that displays somebody's character, but worse than that, like a lab experiment where God's just playing with us. That we're just rats in his grand experiment just to see what are they going to do this time. What's the guy going to choose today? Is he going to go my way? Is he going to go the other person's way? He's like, that's one, God cannot be tempted by evil. Nor does he tempt anyone. He doesn't do that. He's not just trying to see what you're going to choose just for the sake of it. Because if he does, that's super arbitrary. Like there's no point to all of it. Basically, what the conclusion we come to through all of this, when we make a decision about which way we're going to go, we're going to choose right or wrong, we're basically saying that sin is wrong because God says so. Period. That God is this rule maker. Like, okay, he created me fine. I can get behind that. But he's like, he gave me all these rules to follow, and I don't see the point of them. And if you ask him, it's like, well, God, why? And he's like, because I said so. He's like, well, what do you mean by that? He's like, just don't do it because it's wrong. I don't want you to do it. And you're like, that seems unsatisfactory. It doesn't really explain the whole thing. If you've ever wondered about that, you're like, this whole framework doesn't make sense. Really, is that all there is? Just like doing what God says because? You're like, that's it? That's as far as it goes? Then I'm glad you're feeling that way because we want to reject this idea. Not because it's entirely false, because it's only part of the story. It's incomplete. It's only half true. There's more to the story, and James continues with this. He says, the truth of the matter is each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. He's like, there's something inside of each of us that wants to grab our attention and pull us in the wrong direction. It's not necessarily God who's behind it. But then it gets scary. He continues and says this. And then after desire, that thing inside of us has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. He's like, those desires that you might have that want to pull you in the wrong direction, if you let them take over, this is where it ends up. Maybe not physical death, though sometimes, but maybe it's going to destroy the good in your life. It's either going to hurt you or hurt the people around you through you. And if this is what he's talking about, it's not that sin is wrong. It's actually way worse than that. If we allow sin to take hold, if we allow our desires to just go where they want to go, it will destroy the good in our lives. We're not saying sin is simply wrong. It's worse than that. It's that sin is toxic. It's poisonous. It's harmful. It's hazardous. You don't want it because it's going to harm you or someone around you. And if that's the case, then it moves God from being just this lawgiver, rule maker, somebody who just wants to destroy your fun, to somebody who actually wants to keep you having fun, right? He's not this cosmic buzzkill or killjoy who's just trying to wrong or right, you got to choose. It's like, no, there's something more at stake than simply coal or presents if it's the Santa thing. There's something much more big, something bigger, something grander happening here. And this is what he says, James. He says, don't be deceived. Don't misunderstand this. Don't think simply that sin is wrong and God's just an arbitrary judge. He's like, my dear brothers and sisters, every good and perfect gift is from above. All of the good that's in your life is from God, coming down, right? It comes down from the Father of heavenly lights. He's the one who's giving it to you. He does not change like shifting shadows, like one day he's this way, one day he's another. He's trying to preserve and give good things to you. So don't think he's the one behind your testing, like he's the one tempting you. He's not simply a judge and the lawgiver, the rule maker, and he's entrusted his church to become the sin police, and they have to look out in your life and be like, you're doing that wrong, you're not doing this right, you got to get your life in order. That's not how it is. God is not concerned about your grade, whether you've made the nice list or the naughty list. God is concerned about your good. He's trying to preserve and give and protect the good in your life. He's a heavenly Father, not some cosmic judge who just wants to destroy your fun. So that is what we're doing with this series. Now, the first message, which was last week, if you missed it, it's worth going online and checking it out. That's like setting up this week and the subsequent weeks. We're going to be talking about different sins, different things that can ruin us. And now this one we're going to talk about today. I'm hoping that we can get some like practical things that we can do about it. But I think the truth is I don't have to convince you that the thing we're going to be talking about today isn't simply wrong, but it's a problem, that it's harmful, that it hurts, that it can cost us or cost those around us dearly. It's the kind of thing that makes it hard for you to look at somebody else's life and go, I'm glad they're doing well. It's the kind of thing that makes you want to like avoid certain people because you're like, I just don't even want to be around them because I just don't like how it makes me look. It's the kind of thing that makes it hard to celebrate what's going on in others' lives. To jump into it, what I want to do is I want to take a look at something the third king of Israel wrote like 3,000 years ago. He was a very smart guy, and he paid attention to what was going on in his kingdom, and he wrote a whole bunch of things down. It's too bad that he didn't listen to his own words, because he eventually messed everything up. That's a story for another time. But the things that he did write down, they're really, really interesting, useful, and I think still apply even to today. Check this out. So this is what he says after observing his kingdom for a long while. He says, and I saw, because he had been talking about other stuff, he's like, I saw that all toil, that is all work, all effort, and all achievement, like all success, all finally getting to the thing you want to get to, all building the thing you're trying to build, finally getting there, all of that. Where does it come from? It springs from one person's envy of another. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about envy, which is like, great, thank you. That's what I wanted to discuss today. But he's looking around, he's like, and maybe it's hyperbole. I don't know if like literally nobody does anything good for any like noble reasons, but he's like, he's like, I don't know, it just seems like this person's trying because that person tried before him. This person is unsatisfied with being second place, so they want to get first. He's like looking at all of the skilled laborers in his kingdom. And he's like, these guys, they're not just doing for the sake of doing or trying to achieve on their own. They're trying to just compete because they can't help but compare. And comparing isn't wrong. Comparing is natural. It's human, right? It's normal to be like, okay, that object is bigger than this object. The problem is when it's like, oh, they have more money than I do. I'm going to work harder because I want to be at least where they're at, if not further than where they're at. I want to get better. I want to have a bigger home. I want to compare myself. And it's like everything back and forth, back and forth. We recently had a holiday, Thanksgiving, where you get together with all the people that you love, hopefully, and you sit down and you share a meal, and you talk and like, hey, what's going on in your life? And it's so easy to hear somebody's story and be like, that should be me. Or I want what they have. Or like you're getting together, right? You're sitting down at the meal and somebody brings out a dish or whatever and you're like, everyone's like, ooh and ah, and they're like, and it's not yours. And you start to feel something building. You're like, what is going on here? Woo, hey. Sometimes you trip on a thing. What's happening there is you're experiencing envy. It's this feeling that rises up within you that basically says, I want that too. Or maybe it's different for you. Maybe you wouldn't use the word envy. Maybe you were jealous. You're feeling jealous of somebody's accolades or the attention they're getting or the dessert they brought, or you're looking down your block and you're seeing all of the lawn ornaments that this one neighbor has, and everyone's like, oh, look at that, how cool they are. And you're like, oh, I guess we better go to Home Depot and buy some more stuff for the yard. It's this feeling like I got to keep up with and compete with and beat somebody else because they're getting the attention, they're getting the approval, they're getting the acceptance, they're getting the notoriety, whatever it might be, that I should be getting. And for Solomon here, he concludes the following. This feeling of wanting what somebody else has, this too, among other things, is meaningless. Another way you could say it is profitless. Where does it go? What do you really gain if you're just competing with one another all the time? He says it's chasing after the wind. You can never finally grab the wind. Every time you think you got it, it escapes you and you have to keep doing it over and over and over. And envy leads into a loop and a cycle that leads nowhere. It's a game with no end. It's like playing Monopoly. The game takes forever. So, he gives us some practical advice. And this actually, I think, can be very helpful. So check out what he says. He says, fools, like people who just don't get it at all, they just fold their hands and ruin themselves. In other words, the actual Hebrew translation is a little more graphic. It's like fools basically just don't do anything, and the only thing they get to eat is their own flesh. Like, they're not going to work, they're not going to try to achieve anything, they're not going to produce anything and have the means to provide for themselves. The best they can do is eat their own bodies. Kind of graphic. Better than that is one handful with tranquility, as in with some measure of peace, then two handfuls more, and toil and work and the endless pursuit, chasing after the wind. His conclusion here is that envy isn't just wrong, it's pointless. Where does it go? When do you finally hit the mark? Because if you look and you try to achieve and toil and work and compare yourself and do all the things and outbake Brenda and lawn decorate more than Marty and all of these things, or try to get that promotion, someone's always going to be better. There's always someone out there who takes it another step. Where will it end? Because somebody's going to look at you and feel the same thing, and they're going to just continue the cycle. It's pointless. It leads nowhere. And I have been there. I have been there a lot in my life. I wouldn't necessarily use the word envy. I'd be like, that's not fair. They shouldn't have what they have. I should have that. That should be me. That should be mine. A really bold example for me was at the end of senior year. I've been pretty musical all my life. I grew up enjoying music, but I started playing trumpet in elementary school, and I took on guitar in middle school, started singing, started playing drums and bass and all this stuff, and it became a huge part of my life, an enormous part of my life. Still is. And then when, in senior year of high school, the yearbooks came out, there's that section of the superlatives, the most likely to start a fire, and the most likely to end up in prison, and the most, I don't know, I don't remember all of them, but usually they're nice things, not like that, nicest smile. You're like, yeah, it's the orthodontist, let's be real. Okay. there was one that I really, really wanted, and it was the most musically talented. And so when I finally got the yearbook and I cracked it open, it wasn't me. And I would not have said that I'm feeling envy. I'd be like, this is unjust. Thank you. Like, this isn't right. The guy who got it, great guitar player, by the way, and a great drummer. But I played like 3 or 4 more instruments, all right? Like, he's getting the recognition I should be getting. He got the award, he got the superlative that I should have gotten. And I felt envious. I was jealous of what he had. And it bothered me. But it wasn't that it was just pointless. It went further. It soured my relationship. It poisoned my joy. Fortunately, I didn't was it Nancy Kerrigan or whatever, and like break his legs or his fingers. But like, I felt so much anger. I was disappointed. Like, the world is messed up and I didn't get what I should have gotten. Fortunately, through years of hard work, I am now the best. And my wife is going to keel over and die when she hears that. No, that is not the case. But I have had to deal with that. I've had to deal with, because this is not the only area of my life that this comes up. I feel jealous when somebody is better at me than like in anything, or if somebody has more money than me, or if somebody has better hair than I do, which is hard to believe. Watch it. But this shows up, and I'm sure has shown up for you, and that problem isn't that it's just pointless. It gets scarier than that. Here's what James says in another part of his letter to those Christians. He says, "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder, chaos, confusion, and every evil practice. People do horrible things to themselves and to other people because they're feeling envious, because they're looking around and like, that should be mine. That's not theirs. You shouldn't be that way. I should be the one getting the promotion. I should be the one getting the attention. You don't deserve that. I do." And they go and do horrible things because of their envy. He continues, he says this, "What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? Don't they come from this feeling that you just can't get what you want? You're frustrated, you're ticked off, and it's worse than that. There's injustice in this world because somebody else is getting what you deserve." And then he says, "You desire, but do not have, so you kill." Now, I'm hoping that's not the case for us, but you know of stories where jealous people do crazy, horrible, murderous things. And he continues, says, "You covet." That is, you want what somebody else has, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight. Now, these are very like overt, like out in the open kind of things. Sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes it's even like more sinister because it's covert, right? It's like beneath the surface. It's not public. People have slandered and ruined the reputations of others because of envy. They have harmed people in irreparable ways because of the jealous feelings that they have. It's not that envy is simply wrong because God said so, and it's even worse than envy is pointless. It's that envy is toxic. It's poison. It's a hazard to you, to your life, to your good, and to the people around you. And if it's not going to get you permanently, it'll get people through you. Solomon, in another thing that he put together like 3,000 years ago, in the book of Proverbs, the book of wisdom, he says the following. He says, "Envy rots the bones." It's an inside-out problem. You might think it's happening out there. It's because that person's getting what you deserve, but it starts really in here. And that's not what we want for you. That's not what we believe God wants for any of us. Before he says, "Envy rots the bones," Solomon writes, "A heart at peace, are soul satisfied. A person who understands their role in the world, in their community, in their family, because of God, like a heart at peace gives life to the body. And that's what we want. We don't want to be chasing after the wind. We don't want to be struggling and striving just to compete with somebody else and never get the satisfaction that comes with finally getting the thing we're after, because it never ends. So what do we do about that? So I think I have some things we could try. And the first one is probably the most practical. It's applicable to all of us. The philosopher, psychologist, author, Brené Brown, who is brilliant, by the way. Check out her book, Atlas of the Heart. Amazing. She says, the problem most people face when dealing with their stuff, and I don't mean positive stuff, like ugly stuff, things we want out of our lives, is that we can't specifically say what the issue is. Therefore, the first thing we need to do is we need to give it a name. Because I might describe my feelings of envy, my experience of wanting what somebody else has, as simply I'm saying it's, well, it's because the world's not a just place, and I'm not getting what should be mine. Maybe you've had feelings of the world owes you something, and you're seeing somebody get what you should have instead. Perhaps it's bigger than that. Perhaps you've said things like, I feel like God owes me this thing. Maybe you've never verbalized it, but you thought where's God? Why isn't he giving me what I'm after? What we want to be able to do is to say it. Say to yourself, what I'm experiencing is envy. At the heart of that is a feeling that says, I want what they have. I want theirs. That should be me. That's envy. The second thing I would say to this is you should also confess it. Now, that is terrifying. I'm not necessarily saying you should go to the person you're feeling envious about and tell them, hey, I'm feeling jealous. That can go so many different ways. If you're bold and you feel like you can do it, great. But at a minimum, don't let it stay a secret only to you. Talk to somebody you trust and be like, hey, you know how I was telling you about the work stuff and how I was really aiming for this new position, and I felt like I kind of had it in the bag, I was working hard, my resume looked good, I had the experience, I have all of the qualifications, and I know the right people, but they gave it to somebody else. I am feeling envy. I want that for me so bad, but I need to tell you so I don't let it fester in the dark. You don't need to go to the person that actually got it and be like, I just want to let you know I'm feeling envious. Have a great day. They'd be like, who are you? But you need to get it out. Don't let it just stir on the inside and turn it to something you don't want it to turn into. That's the first step. Now, the rest of these steps, I think that this is not optional for those that follow Jesus. I think these are very intentional steps. They serve a purpose. But if you're not a Christian, if you're I'm just checking this out, I'm not really sure about all this, I understand. But you're welcome to give this a try. It's optional for you, but it's a mandatory course for the rest of us. This is what the Apostle Paul says. He was not one of the original 12 disciples of Jesus. In fact, he was an enemy of the people that followed Jesus initially, but he became a Christ follower, a Christian. And then he started churches all over the place and became a pastor that would write to them from afar and be like, hey, you need to work on this, giving them really solid practical advice. And he writes this letter to the church in Rome. I believe he was in prison at this time. And they're dealing with Christians who are literally looking at one another going I noticed their ministry is going better than mine. And he's like, what? He's like, I noticed they're getting more applause and more accolades for all they're doing. And he's like, this is not how the church, right, the gathering of the believers of Christ, of Jesus, should operate. So he writes this letter to them, and he says this. We have different gifts. Each one of us have abilities and talents natively, and they're different. And they're according to the grace given to each of us. He's like, God, in his wisdom, in his way of doing things, has given each one of us different gifts, different abilities, in different amounts. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. And he continues, if it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it's giving, then giving generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. He's like, guys, God has given each one of us, every single person, a role and the things necessary to accomplish that role. And in the most loving way possible, he's like, stay in your lane. Stop looking at the person next to you. Stop comparing yourself to somebody who has a different role. You know, if you're a parent, your kids only get one parent, like you're the parent. Don't compare yourself to how someone else parents their kids. You're the one who needs to parent your kids, right? Everyone's given a role to play. Play it well. In the most, like, if there's a positive way to say it, it's like mind your own business. Like literally, like you do you and you crush that. Keep your eyes on your game, not anybody else's. We could say it this way. Celebrate what you have. God has given to you. He's given to me. He's given to each one of us. Why are we looking all around, comparing ourselves to how they're doing? And then it's stirring up feelings of envy and like, well, they're doing it better than I am, but they're not doing the same thing, but it feels like they are, and I should have. It's like, no. Just keep your eyes on you. And then he gives us some extra steps, which I think this is how you crush, you kill envy. He says this, bless those who persecute you, which, at this time, the Christians were literally being persecuted. We don't get to experience that truthfully the way that they did in this country, but like the Christians were being hunted and imprisoned and tortured. And Paul, I think he's in prison at this time, says, bless those people. Bless those people who wish to harm you, or it seems at least that they're trying to harm you. Like, speak highly of them. This word bless is the same word we get the word eulogy from. It means to praise highly. He's like, you want to beat envy? You want to destroy envy and crush those feelings of like not getting what you want and wanting what somebody else has? Bless those who aren't on your side. Speak highly of them. When Janice brings that casserole to Thanksgiving, talk it up. When Gary starts dragging out all of the inflatables for his lawn, tell your neighbors, be like, hey, when he's all done, we're all going to go there and we're going to celebrate what this guy is up to. We're going to just love all of the lights. When somebody else gets a promotion, be excited for them. Bless them, like, hey, I am so glad somebody got it. Right? But bless those who persecute you. And then he continues and he says, bless and do not curse, as in don't ruin somebody's reputation. Don't wish harm upon them. You got to beat envy to the punch. You got to get ahead of those feelings and start to bless them. And he continues, it says, rejoice with those who rejoice. There is a path that envy can take a person where they do the opposite, where they rejoice when people suffer, when they can't wait to see someone taken down a peg, when they hope somebody gets hurt with their reputation, with their job, with their income, relationships, because it feels like they have what you should have. And he's like, that's not how the people of God do it. We're not that way. We don't do it that way. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Celebrate the good that's going on in people's lives. And the converse, mourn with those who mourn. Don't celebrate their sadness. Be a shoulder to lean on. And he concludes with, live in harmony with one another. In other words, not only do you celebrate what you have, but celebrate what they have. Now, if we all just left now, basically what we've been talking about, I think it's important, but what you probably received or heard was like, all right, I just got to do better. I just have to do more of the right things. And that's kind of going back to the right and wrong, naughty or nice framework. Here's what all of this hinges on. Like Paul, at the top of this chapter, this part of his letter, he says a concluding statement summing up the last couple chapters in his letter, and then he gives everything we've been talking about. This, you cannot miss this. This is like the most important thing you could get from all of this. If you forget envy and all of it, this is the most important thing. He begins the section with, therefore, like concluding, I urge you, I'm praying you get this. I don't want you to miss what I'm about to tell you. Brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, everything else, how you live, how you honor God, how you deal with sin, envy, pride, jealousy, gluttony, lust, how you live as a follower of Jesus all hinges on this idea. That God is not up there like, all right, let's see what they do. I can't wait to bring the hammer down. I cannot wait. Like, this is exciting. No. He's like, I know they're struggling. And I'm not going to let them struggle on their own. I'm going to send my son to pay the ultimate price for their mistakes, that they might be brought in and adopted into my family. That God is not like apathetic and just like, whatever, let's see what these rats in this lab will do. He's like, no. He extended his compassion, his grace, his care, his concern to us in the form of Jesus. Keep that in your view. It's super hard to be looking at what everyone else is doing when you're staring at God's mercy. So maybe it isn't just simply like, rejoice and whatever. If maybe you need to start here. Maybe you need to figure out, okay, what is this all about? Because if we lose this, nothing else even matters. If we don't understand God's mercy, if we don't understand God's compassion towards the human race collectively and each one of us individually, all of it is fluff. It's just behavior modification. But when we recognize who we are in view of God's mercy, it's like, oh, I don't need to compare. I don't need to look at other people's successes because God says, I'm enough. Like he did it all for each one of us, not just me, and not just for the people I like, but for even those that I feel envious of. We're all in the same group. And it's because of this we can rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn and put away envy for something better. And hopefully, if we keep this in mind, we start to move this idea of God from being the lawgiver, the rule maker, the judge, the punisher and executioner, to understanding him as a heavenly Father who wishes to give good gifts to each of his children, that they might thrive, that they don't get ensnared by envy and feelings of jealousy and resentment and feeling like this world is unjust and they just can't get what they want because they're safe and secure in God first because of what Jesus has done. So, holidays have this way of like bringing these things up, and we have another one coming up. So, for the rest of this month, to Christmas and New Year's, how are you going to approach family and friends? What are you going to do when you start to feel that tug that's like, nope, don't like that they're doing better than you. No, don't celebrate how good things are going for them. Don't be excited when they announce they're going to go to Fiji or Ireland, wherever. When that stuff rises up, what will you do? Will you remind yourself? It's like, I don't need to play this game. I don't need to chase after the wind. I don't need to enter every area of my life as if it's a competition and I have got to win. But rather, I can stay in my lane. I can do what God has presented me to do, what he has given me to do. And I can celebrate what's going on in my life, what God has given me, and celebrate what everybody else has. Because if you do that, you'll push envy out, and that poison won't be a part of your life, and you will thrive, and the relationships and the things that you have in your life will be beautiful.